Hello, and welcome back to episode 6 of Veridian County, our realistic Pacific Northwest themed city here in City Skylines 2. In today's episode, I want to fill out the Greater Grand Central District that we began in episode 4, anchoring it with a fully custom convention center, a massive event venue rivaling other major cities in the US. Once we've done that, we'll transform the East Asian Cultural District, beginning at the south end and working our way towards Grand Central, anchored by our city's huge central library. Lastly, I want to develop the East Asian Cultural District's Hilltop District, anchored by a massive German mall and working with the topography to push the boundaries of our city. Before we dive into the work that we want to do today, let's begin with an episode recap. In the last episode, we began by recreating the real-life Vegas sphere here in City Skylines 2, using a combination of mods and wall assets from the game's region packs. Then we placed rail tracks that ran throughout the entire map, through new tunnels, farmland, over water, and through the mountains. And we finished the episode by establishing rail service, drawing out our major regional rail lines and creating new train depots to support these uses. In today's episode, I want to fill out the Greater Grand Central District, beginning with the area around this intersection over here. This is a major intersection for us, linking up the East Asian Cultural District and the Waters District with Greater Grand Central using Hawthorne Street, having this big old roundabout, a whole bunch of windy roads, and some really oddly shaped parcels. One of the things that I said when creating this interchange in one of the first episodes was that it doesn't really make sense out of context, but once you start to put it in the context of a bigger, taller city, suddenly the compactness of this interchange and the height that it uses suddenly starts to make a whole lot more sense. So to really encapsulate that, I want to fill out this entire area, detailing around this lake and adding some buildings all throughout each of these little awkwardly shaped parcels. While we're at it, I'm going to be looking through the buildings. Oh, there's been an accident, I see. While I'm at it, since I'm going to be looking through the buildings for this area anyway, I might also begin to plop and move some of the buildings around up here in the Greater Grand Central District, just to understand how the district might end up shaping out, and so that we really start to get this master planned district feel. And that looks something like this. I got distracted. I couldn't really find a whole lot of buildings that I was super happy with to fit in this area yet, but I'm starting to get some ideas. What I focused on first was filling out this whole area around the lake. Beforehand it was just barren grass, but now we've got some textures in here. We've got ourselves a pedestrian path that loops its way all around these buildings, and I set up a whole bunch of different levels of retaining walls because City Skylines 2 does not handle terrain very well. So we've got ourselves a couple of high-density offices, a little bit of housing in here, and a signature building, a tea lounge, just to really take advantage of this view you got over here of the water and, unfortunately, of the whole highway interchange behind it. And this is where I'm starting to use a technique that I want to use a lot more throughout today's episode, using rocks to blend the terrain. I think the rocks look really nice, especially when they're intertwined with a whole bunch of bushes like this, and using the bushes and the rocks really helps to cover up some of the imperfections in City Skylines 2's terrain. Like, if you really look underneath here, you can see that, like, see where this bush is? It's way down there, but in reality, it just comes together to feel like a more cohesive surface, because we're hiding all the weirdness of it and jankiness of the terrain. So I'm happy with how this little pond lake area is detailed out now. I even got myself a little bit of a mini beach area for folks. I don't think people want to be swimming around in here because there's probably not much fresh water coming in here, so it's kind of going to get a little bit dirty. But this is probably a really nice place to rent some paddle boats. So once we get some custom assets in the game, I'm going to put some paddle boats in here and have people riding those all around the lake. Continuing on the parks theme, we had this awkwardly shaped parcel right on top of our tunnel entrance over here, and I've known from the start that I wanted to turn it into some sort of train watchers park for all of the transit nerds out there. So I just chained together a couple of assets. I took our tiny city central park, mirrored the theme with a couple of prop garden beds, and put a gazebo down there. Then I put a small playground over here, and then unified all the surfaces using the same material. I started to bring that back on the road surface, and I'll still figure out what I want to do here. Probably more parks, I guess. You know, if we're turning this entire awkwardly shaped parcel into a park, then it only makes sense there, and you can't build anything with the tram lines right there either. Then, of course, I just added a little bit of extra detail to this train line. Maybe that was already done, but we've got a little bit of industrial manufacturing now, and just a little bit of garbage to really fully detail this area. Moving into the proper Greater Grand Central District now, you can start to feel a little bit more of the master planned feel. Okay, here's the concept. I want us to have tapering density, where over here, closer to downtown, we have allowed some high rises, but they have to be really small because they want to be interlaced with these lower density buildings, just so that we're not overwhelming with this area with density. Rather than having it all be mid-rises, I figured this high-rise, low-rise, high-rise, low-rise pattern would be kind of interesting as we're driving along Hawthorne Street. It really gives each individual building a lot more character and makes it all feel a little bit more unique. Then the density starts to taper down. You've got some buildings that are still somewhat high up over here, but they're not nearly as tall as the high rises of downtown or along Hawthorne Street. And then, of course, you move down into your mid-rises areas over here with the hotel and the bookshop that are right next to the train station. I don't like where either of these hotels are, so I think I'm going to end up moving those. But I think we're starting to get an idea over here with the master planned area along Kent Street, which is the road that feeds directly from our train station straight into the Grand Fountain Plaza. I've started to put down these country hotels so that it really feels like we have a cohesive theme of some sorts going through here. Rather than it all being this American urbanism, you've got the bookshop, you've got your country hotels, and you're making your way towards this Mediterranean, more European style buildings on the opposite side of the roundabout. I'm liking how all this is feeling, but one of the things that master plan districts are really known for is their use of parks. So in this area, I've shifted around a couple of the buildings from the last time you saw it to accommodate for these features. We've got a passage park right here, which I think was there beforehand, but we've now also got the large city park, which is surrounded by these three somewhat iconic buildings. You've got a more historic and classical building facade there. Then you've got this modern, darker building in Seattle. I would think of this as an RH, which is this weird, like, bougie home decor store, and they all look the same, and they use the same beige tone just like everywhere. And then we have the signature building Square Center, which is this big old fashion style building selling textiles right now. And all three of these buildings are located all centered around the city park. So you really get this plaza type of feel that really makes us feel, you know, master planned. The last thing I've done so far is I've started to add a couple of buildings underneath the train tracks. I don't want them to encroach fully on the train tracks, so anywhere there's a conflict, I am avoiding as much as possible. But we're able to squeeze in a couple of low-rise buildings over here and a bunch of parking. Because, you know, since this is a modern district, we're not afraid to use modern building techniques and squeeze our way under the train tracks. Now, I did see a couple of assets that I thought would be kind of fitting for this area around the roundabout. As we get closer to Grand Central, I'm thinking that we want to have some low-rise buildings, maybe some parks, and some auto-oriented uses. I don't want it to be too high up because then it'll overwhelm the feeling of Grand Central, especially against this historic facade. The urban planners of the city would have been really focused on maintaining the sightlines to this facade and preserving areas for the tourists to take their photos of it. So we don't want anything too high up, and I think we want to think about the uses over here as well. We could have some office buildings because that would be really close to this train station, which is where all the commuters are coming into the city, but I really want to focus on motels. We've got our nice fancy hotels up in the greater Grand Central District, but some cheaper motels might make sense closer to the highway exit and closer to Grand Central, so anyone who's stranded by the last train of the night can just stay the night over in a motel around here. And there we go, we're starting to fill in this area. It's slow progress, but we're getting there. I put in a gas station right across from this highway exit, kind of something that you would see typically. In this kind of awkwardly shaped parcel, I put one of our USA Southwest themed buildings. It's kind of awkward, it's a little bit run down, and it's this odd shape, which is kind of exactly something that I would expect to see next to a highway interchange, even in a city as busy as this. Then we just got a couple of other low-density businesses, just random highway-style builds, not really relating as much to the downtown area just because of the shape of these parcels, but I can see in the future of the city, this rectangular parcel over here is a prime spot for redevelopment into some mid-rise residential housing. Over on the opposite side of things, as mentioned, we have some auto-oriented uses. In this case, we have the oil and gear garage, which is really this like car repair spot selling vehicles, and I think it's the perfect spot in case your car is breaking down, you're on the highway and you don't have enough gas to get out of the downtown area. You can just pull in here, stop at the garage, and get yourself all tuned up. Then as we move closer to Grand Central, we've got ourselves an office building and a couple of motels. So anybody who's staying the night in the area can just rent a cheap little room right in Grand Central if they didn't expect to do that, and you're golden. Across the way, we've got 4 high-density offices, and these are actually the same asset, I believe, just leveled up differently. You can tell the similarities from the arches on the bottom. Now I'm going to need to remember to recolor this. If I don't recolor them by the end of the episode, yell at me in the comments, please. This kind of shows this block might have been built out by the same developer over time, wanted to create 4 major towers, all with different things. This one seems like it's been upgraded over time, where the original footprint was probably the same as both of these. You can see that barrier line right here, but this one was upgraded once, this was upgraded twice. You got one big upgrade here, and then a second one to finish off the building into its current state. And I kind of like how they situate in the block. I need to move them around and detailing them up a little bit, but that'll be later on in the episode. For now, I like how we're getting some offices around the area, some motels. This Grand Central area is starting to work in its uses. But we're not done yet, I actually wasn't too happy with that high-density business that we had over there previously. It just felt like there was too much of a density gap between these areas, so I upgraded it a little bit. I made it a little bit taller, and that allowed me to squeeze in an extra little parking lot right over here. And I started to detail this area up, extending the surfaces all throughout here, and adding some barriers so people who are driving or walking along here don't just fall off the walls into the highways. Done the same thing here on the other side, adding in some barriers, some foliage, and a couple of pocket parks. And of course, right in front of Grand Central, as promised, we've got a little bit of a corner cafe and a couple of parks, so that anybody who wants to take some pictures of Grand Central can stand in this obnoxiously decorated plaza. Look right here, and beautiful. There's your shot of the old Mediterranean Grand Central with the loud trains in the background. Just this little bit of landscaping and detailing has really helped this area come to life. I love that we have these hedges and these boundaries. I love all the parks around here. I think I need to continue that all throughout this area, continue with the hedges, continue with the foliage, but I like how this is starting to turn out. Now, just to round out my work around this intersection, I want to make sure that we fill in these 2 blocks over here. This triangle one is going to be kind of interesting. I think the best strategy over here is going to be to use some of our static ploppable buildings, just like we did here on the waterfront of the Old Town, because that means that we can sink them into ground and clip them into each other without any major problems. So I think I can clip 3 buildings right into each other over here and form a nice triangle. This block is kind of our last typical rectangular block before you enter the rest of this area, but since it's surrounded by all this infrastructure, it's something that would be a prime candidate for upzoning, so I think I want to have a mixture of ages of buildings in this area. And all that said, that ends up looking kind of like this. Here we've got ourselves our 3 static ploppable buildings all clipped into each other. We're using the UK large flats, and I think you can tell a little bit, especially by the roof line, that these are 3 individual buildings. But from the ground level, it does feel like one cohesive building, especially as you're doing a flyover from above. It just kind of works. The ground surface below it is detailed out with some bricks and a little mini park. And of course, this block over here is, as I mentioned, a big old mixture of uses, as it's our last block, and it's a big transition between the East Asian Cultural District and the Downtown Waters District over here. Also, now that it's spring, I really like how this landscaping around here is looking. I love the greenery that it's providing for this whole area. While we're chatting about it, I also filled out the Greater Grand Central District a little bit more, adding a couple more high-density buildings around here, some parking lots, and one little square of French buildings. You know, we've already got this square of Mediterranean buildings around here, so I thought, why not continue the trend where presumably these for-profit developers decided to just come in here, build something that they thought would look cool, even though in reality it's really out of place, and just create this really unique block with parking on one side and all that. And of course, I put a parking lot right in here in this blank parcel that we had, because of course, you need your parking buildings, especially in a tourism district like this, and since you're so close to Grand Central Station, this parking building would be, you know, a pretty crucial feature of the land. Now that we have this intersection filled out, it's time to move on to the development of our convention center. Thanks to its location proximal to Grand Central Station and all of these hotels that we have throughout here, I think the Greater Grand Central District is a fantastic area for a convention center, particularly this area right over here. This is on the boundary of our main development for our city, right next to some highways and some industrial area. This is really a parcel of land that would not be suited well for hotels or for residential development or anywhere that people would be staying for a long term, because this would probably be one of the more highly polluted sections of the city. But despite that, it is absolutely beautiful prime real estate. It's so close to our major transportation network, it's so close to such urbanism and hotels in the area, so I think it's best suited for either a mall or a convention center. Now, we're already planning on doing some sort of mall up here in the Hilltop district of the East Asian Cultural District, so a convention center it is, and I want this to be stunning. By default, City Skylines 2 does not have any assets that are convention centers or even vaguely convention center-like. The closest thing that I can think of that we have is the Square Center, but that is just way too small. We need a giant convention center, one that will rival the major cities in the area around here, and attract visitors from across the country and across the world to our major city of Lemuria. So this needs to be a major custom designed building. We're going to build it sustainable, we're going to build it green, and we're going to build it big. This is a weirdly shaped block, so I think I'm going to have to get rid of Umber Street and Willow Street. Before we do that, I want to play around with the assets and just kind of see what works here. I'll probably be making some good use of these static ploppable buildings that we have over here, since this means that I can also place down some of our signature buildings and move them into the ground, and not have any of the expensive benefits that they might bring to our city when I don't want them to. So I can really experiment with some more unique architecture around here. And oh my goodness, I am telling you guys, this has taken me a solid 24 hours to figure out. Okay, I did go to sleep in that time, and I have a life, don't worry, but my goodness, I went through so many different assets to figure out what I wanted in this area, and I ended up settling on this. One of the big ideas that I originally had was to use this parking tower and this round office that we have over here to kind of complement one another and create this dual layer focal point over here where I can build a bridge over Kent Street, framing our Fountain Plaza. But at the end of the day, I just don't think that ended up working out too well. That building and the sky bridge blocked the views of our Fountain Plaza from the train station and just really made this feel less cohesive. So I decided to keep it all nice and secure in one building. And instead, I kept this automated parking building. I sunk it down into the ground very slightly. So if I highlight over this, you can see it's underground slightly, and it's not functional at all. Instead of linking this automated parking building to another round structure over here for architecture-wise, I decided to link it to this technical university extension wing. This is a cool building because it has this round portion right here on the corner, and I thought that that was a perfect way to frame our parking building. And if you look at that from right here, it looks pretty well put together, to be honest. Squeezing that research extension right here into the corner meant that I had to redirect our road over here, which is now called Wood Street, right around the corner of that. So I just turned that in, brought it in at 90 over here, created a little bit of a plaza area on both sides over here, and ran that straight into the road that runs around our train station. This extension wing also has this odd jut out portion, which you can see to the left side of the asset right now. So I had to figure out what to do with that. It was placed pretty well facing parallel to Kent Street right over here. So I created a little bit of a frontage roads for drop-offs and maybe buses in the future and all that. But we still had that awkwardly shaped thing sticking out of there. So I decided to use another asset, which is the Medical University Research Facilities. I just love these university assets. They're clean, white, and modern. And I was able to sink that also into the grounds, lower that down, and position it just right. So it kind of creates this nice little block area. I placed one over here facing this way, and I duplicated it again facing the other way. So on the side facing Kent Street, we mostly see the Technical University's face, but then on the other side, we get this blank wall, followed by a nice little entry area. And these two assets feel pretty similar in one another to architectural style, and if you lined up the roof heights like I did over here, it kind of works and they fit together pretty well. The last thing that I wanted to do, just to give it a little bit more interest, was add in these lecture halls right on top. As you may remember from my Grand Central Station development, these lecture halls are one of my favorite assets. They have this nice little modern flair to the development. They have a really nice roof line, some cool skylights running on top, and they don't take up too much space vertically, just a couple of stories. So I was able to position them pretty well and have some nice little rooftop access viewpoints right over here, while keeping the front nice and clear for the research facilities to shine through. I'm pretty happy with how this is going, but I really need to get to detailing this area to make it all come together. My biggest issue right now is that the roof lines just don't feel cohesive. While these lecture halls start to pull it all together, I can't bring more lecture halls into the other side, or they would start to clip into the parking building and mess with our circular motif that we have going on over here. So to cover up these areas, I'm thinking that I'm going to use some solar panels and maybe even a green roof, because that's something that you would expect to see on a major development that's as big as this. And all of that looks something like this. Starting with the roof lines, which is the problem I mentioned to you before, I put in a bunch of solar panels on here, and suddenly these two feel so much more cohesive. Plus, I put in some green roofs that span the Technical University building that cover all the different roofs over here, and I added some greenery down on the ground level, and that just really ties all of this together. Then I used this tile service that we have from our G87 French-inspired pack, and I use that to create some plazas on all sides of the building. We've got our main entrance right here along Kent Street and with Belmont Lane as our throughway. The main entrance is framed by a couple of fountains and parks, and it's really just a grand gathering place right in front of the convention center for everybody to enter in. The parking garage had this little bump out right over here, so I decided to add in a couple of pergola props and recolor those so that we get a canopy over top. And I recolored the Technical University roofs to match that same black color because I think it looks a little bit more sleek. And then around the back over here where our road was curving through here, I put another little water source, little fountain area, just to frame out this main underpass entrance over here. I figured this would be a major entrance and gathering space for the people. They might come out here to socialize, have lunch and all that. And then of course this building has its own entrance, so I added a third one over here. I could see this being more of a service entrance or a back entrance for performers or event coordinators. Moving into the block to the south, this convention center needed some parking, so I decided to place another one of our multi-level parking buildings right across the road from it and connect that up with the sky bridge, which I think looks really cool. I'm telling you, remember how I was telling you about I wanted that sky bridge over Kent Street? Well, I couldn't give up the idea, so now we have a parking sky bridge, which is, slightly less glorious, but it'll do. That left this kind of awkward 2D parcel right over here, so I used some of our urban promenades buildings and linked all those together, and now we've got this amazing front with the parking garage in the back, and it just really makes this district feel a little bit more special, especially right next to this bookshop. You got this really nice modern development right around here that would probably have accompanied the convention center at the time of its development. You can imagine that all of this was done by the city as a big master planned effort just to unite these couple of blocks. They had to leave the Heath Pub and the Country's Hotel in place because those were more historic buildings, but they developed everything else around here, including this more modern housing development, commercial development, a little bit of storage for the convention center, the parking garage, and the big old convention center in itself. Out of curiosity, I wanted to see just how big this is, so I drew a couple pedestrian paths through here. I found out that this is a pretty large block. This is like 150 by 150 yards, which is basically a 200,000 square foot parcel. Now there are some open spaces on here, but if we take all of that into account, we end up with the convention center that's almost 1 million square feet. These are 2 to 3 stories in each of these sections, and this tower in and of itself is about 12 stories. So if you multiply all that together over a 200,000 square foot parcel, you get 1 million square feet convention center, which is about the right size that I would expect to rival major cities in the US. While we were at it, I made sure that this park over here was also developed. So I just put in our arch props that we had from the Chinese region pack, put a fountain underneath them, and then just put a little low density housing right in here because I felt like it matched the theme of the country hotels and it felt a little bit historic, just kind of tying together this whole area. And if we look at it from above, we're starting to feel a more comprehensive Greater Grand Central District, especially thanks to this gorgeous brand new convention center that we've got for ourselves. With our convention center in place, I thought it pertinent to continue to develop our Greater Grand Central District off camera a little bit. We had that awkward parking structure just located down here, so I moved it up to begin to frame in our convention center a little bit more, added in a second pedestrian sky bridge to connect the 2 parking garages, and now it makes a little bit more sense to have this big old convention center with 450 parking spaces, or 440 technically, rather than just 200. It makes sense to have this doubled up and serving the convention center specifically. Off to the side over here, we have this kind of awkward plateau that, again, is more unwanted space, so I just put a cinema over here. It's somewhat auto-oriented, but it kind of makes sense to have across from the convention center some more leisure venues, like the cinema that we have. It fits in a little bit, I think, especially architecturally. It doesn't feel like you have another building over here that's jutting out. It feels like the block kind of continues, the massing all stays somewhat in line with one another, and then you just have this parking lot squeezed in over here in the middle of the forest. Up around Fountain Plaza, I started to add in a few more of our leisure venues. We've got ourselves a museum, a brewery, and of course a lounge, or a nightclub rather, because you can't have a giant entertainment district and hotel district without having those. And of course we've got ourselves a little park right in front of the convention center where previously I planned to put another building, but I thought it just made sense to have something where you can just stand here and take your beautiful pictures of the Fountain Plaza, even with the Vegas Sphere in the background. Just a pretty cool view over here. And the last things that I need to do to really finish up Greater Grand Central is just fill in these remaining couple of blocks and make sure that our detailing throughout the entire district is cohesive. And that took me a little bit of time. It's now autumn, but we do have Greater Grand Central officially finished. That's so exciting. I know. I love the autumn colors in this game. They look so vibrant. They're so cool. We've got our fully custom park right up here. I put it in a basketball court because I thought that kind of fit in, and I put a decal right over the top of it to dull the super bright colors. We've got a gym, a playground, and a little bit of recreation area for people to sit down and grab some things to eat. Then over here, we've got these random obelisks. I'm pretty sure it's of the Skyline Palace, but they're vague enough that I'm going to call them the Peony Towers. So I'm calling this like a Peony Towers obelisk right over here, which I landscaped up around. Then I just put a couple of trees and some wildflower surfaces all throughout the rest of this area. And we got ourselves a fully custom park. Look at that, fits in the block pretty well. Then this odd-shaped block, I kept the Sunshine Hotel right there because it felt kind of cool, but then I just squeezed in the Hotel Polonais right behind there. We originally had that located over here by our train station, but it just didn't feel right. So I squeezed that in right over here at a little bit of an angle, and then duplicated this commercial building or mixed-use building a couple times over here, copied the color scheme, tweaked it a little bit, and we got ourselves a pretty unique looking building. It's technically fronting Magnolia Street, but it's got a really nice presence here in the roundabout as well, so I like it at the end of the day. Just want to take a moment to admire our skyline from this angle. We've just totally transformed it with all these buildings around the roundabout and our convention center. Now that we have a fully custom convention center built and our Greater Grand Central District filled out, it's time to begin to transform the East Asian Cultural District, beginning with the area around a central library. Now you can see that I've already started to do a little bit of work here in the East Asian Cultural District, just beginning to experiment with the technique that I think we'll see as we make our way all around this hillside, where I drew in a pedestrian path, just an ordinary one, and then using the Find It menu, I found a horizontal pillar, and I used the line tool to draw that in a straight line in fence mode right up a hill to give ourselves kind of this impression of stairs. If you look too closely, it may not be the most realistic because the stair tread height is like half the height of a person, but you know, it gives the impression of stairs, especially from above. And if you pull them a little bit closer to one another, you can get that tread height to be slightly more reasonable. So if you look at Ida Quinlan over here, it does look like she's slowly making her way down the center of the steps, which is a pretty cool way of, you know, blending our way up the hillside over here. Although we're probably going to end up redeveloping all those roads eventually. Anyway, back to the main topic, we're trying to develop the East Asian Cultural District. And I think that I want to anchor that with the central library building right over here. You know, we've got some kind of awkwardly shaped roads over here, but they do have some degree of an urban hierarchy to them. So I'd like to put a little purpose to this. We've got our overground subway station right over here, followed by First Ave, apparently, leading right out of that with our Dragon's Gate. And I want this view right here to be a prominent view. While I'm glad that we have the college over here, I don't think this is the best place for it. We probably want to move that to this big old block over here, but I think we can line this whole triangle area over here just with cultural businesses from there all the way through. Then we can put a park in the triangle and a big old signature building right in the middle over here, so that we transform this area and get this really nice historic feel to it. Oh yeah, this is getting there. This is closer to the right vibe. Look how many people we've got now. I've placed down our city library right over here and a couple of Dragon's Gate pack assets, and this is really starting to frame it. I think I need to do some recoloring because I think these gray roofs don't really shine enough for me, but you're starting to feel this perfect angle right down what's now called Madison Street. I also went through the Dragon's Gate assets and plopped down a whole bunch of them all throughout this district, along the back of the library and any of the bigger plots that I could find. Just started to place them down all over the place. The college just moved over here. I put a parking garage right here next to this highway exit because that kind of makes sense. And then I started to sprinkle in just a couple of high rises from these Chinese packs. I put the Japanese high density offices over here, a Chinese high rise over here and over here, little Chinese mid rise over here, just to start to incorporate some of that East Asian feel. One of the major things that I want to keep in mind as we fill out the East Asian Cultural District is how it's also serving on this big transition. The first thing that you'll notice is that some of these buildings are colored in brick colors because we are still right next to the old town, and I don't want to lose that brick feeling immediately as we move into the more modernized areas. We want to keep the brick buildings because this is probably, you know, just as old as Old Town. Maybe it's been upzoned a little bit, redone a few times, repainted, but it's still going to be a really historic area of town, so we want to keep the brick feeling wherever possible. So you've got a whole bunch of brick buildings in the high rises, some of the first brick high rises in the city probably, some of the mid rises in the same way, and you're just starting to feel this transition, starting to make your way past the brick and into the more East Asian commercial assets towards the city library. I also want to keep in mind how it's a density taper. I really do not want the East Asian Cultural District to be as dense as the Central Business District or as low density as the Old Town, which is why, as you can see, I've got some of these high rises placed in throughout here. We've got mid rises, low rises, high rises, just this really big variety of density. And I think this is also something that's pretty typical of Asian cities and just cities outside of North America in general. The zoning overall is a lot more varied, so you'll see a really good mix of business, commercial areas, residential areas, all just mixed all together, different heights, different building styles, all of that stuff. So I wanted to break free of our American style zoning and heights that we have everywhere else and kind of use this as an opportunity to stagger the heights of our buildings a little bit and maybe hint at some taller buildings, kind of like Grand Central, but still maintain an overall lower mid-rise feel, kind of like Old Town. So you kind of get this nice blend where it starts off high, you got a few tapering things, but you're making your way to the lower waterfront over here. I'm liking how these foundational principles are working out, so I think I'll go ahead and test it out fully on one of the blocks here in the Cultural District. I'll see what it looks like if I detail out an entire block from head to toe using all the right buildings, all the right detailing techniques, and everything. And there we go. I mean, it's really more like a block and a half, but don't blame me, I got carried away, I got a little bit excited. So we've got our first full section of the East Asian Cultural District and this big old park here filled in. I love designing parks in this game, it's one of my favorite things to do. Starting with the park, I squeezed in this park cafe right in the centerpiece as our major attractor. The main goal over here was to create some more cross pathways for people who are coming from the subway station, getting to the city library. So we've got a whole bunch of pathways weaving through here, starting with the main park cafe that loops around here, and I like this way this circular asset kind of blends this very slight angular inaccuracy. Because Because in case you couldn't tell, Madison Street is not perfectly parallel or perpendicular to the city library. They're at a very slight off angle. So I think this round asset hides that off angle pretty well. Then we've got a nice little woody walkthrough over here on one side and a cafe area on the other side, which also speaks a little bit to the urban character of the area. While this woody area is probably going to be closer to the waterfront and closer to this college, this cafe area is closer to this dense shopping core and this block that we filled out over here with all of these East Asian assets. That's right, we've got different styles of housing from the Northeast, similar to the Old Town, to China's medium housing and Japanese medium housing, more Northeast stuff. Just this really cool variety, everything painted a little bit to reminisce about the brick. Then on the front, we've got some really nice plazas. We've got a little bit of hinting at a park. We've got some seating areas for the businesses out here who might be serving their food. And then in the back over here, where these roads don't connect around the Japanese housing, they don't connect through here. So we just built out another little seating area, probably for all of these little developments to share and just go eat outside in the middle of everything. We've got parking wherever we could, a couple of them here along Aspen Lane, some here along Spring Lane, and of course our street parking. But generally, I think this is looking, I don't know, pretty nice. I like how the detailing techniques of this area are starting to make it feel like it's more East Asian. This was a really key transition block, and you can feel that transition as you're going from the Old Town over here more to the cultural assets right along there. But it doesn't feel too dramatic because we are keeping this brick texture and because we are still keeping housing elements going all throughout this area. With all these blocks done, it's time to continue to develop the district. This is going to take me, frankly, forever. So I don't know how much I'm going to bring you in, but I'll do my best to keep you updated wherever something's important. And ta-da! My goodness, this took me a whole weekend to do. I'm not kidding you. This is taking me forever because I'm putting so much detail into every single block. There's no open space left over. Everything is just so tight and compact. We got buildings lining every single street. We got alleys thinking their way through there. We've got parking, we got parks, we got mixes of housing and commercial and colleges and towers and everything around here. Oh, it's amazing and also just so tiring to work on, and I love it. I'm loving it to bits. You can see that I took that roofing color that we had in our Grand Annecy Hotel and applied it to all of the buildings throughout this area. I also added dirt decals all throughout here because historically in these East Asian cultural districts, you'll see that they're a little bit less maintained because of historic inequities and policies. They just don't have as much funding, as much of a tax base, as much wealth, generational wealth within them, so they end up getting a little bit more dirty and run down, but they're still gorgeous places to hang out and exist. There's just so many valuable places to live and work and eat there. I added some brick sidewalks into there so that we continue that transition from the Old Town, especially from above. It feels a little bit more cohesive, continuing the brick in very slightly, and with the brickish colored rooftops, terracotta roofing tiles. If we look at it from the side, you can see how we're starting to use that tapering of density that I mentioned. Most of the buildings are kind of around that mid-level or even low level, but we've got a couple of towers, and this one in particular stands out because I wanted to add just a hint of gentrification in. While this is mostly older brick buildings and cultural style assets, especially with the pergolas and using that, I added in a couple of new buildings where we could. This corner, for example, is an infill mixed housing project. This one right on the waterfront, this is a luxury housing tower. Everybody in the community was mad at this, but it was tucked way off to the side by some industrial area and by the parking, so nobody really could complain too much because it wasn't in the heart of the district. Imagine how out of place this tower would look right here. Everyone was glad that it was kind of off to the side, but they were still upset because it's taking away from this beautiful density taper that we got coming down to the water. We got some slightly nicer buildings right over here, but I think of this as more of dorms for this college rather than gentrified new buildings. But this over here, totally gentrified. You've got this like older, dirtier look over here with the row houses and the shops and cultural buildings. And then you get to this little back block over here, and you got these ugly new buildings, all white and all modern. But despite that gentrification, right next door is a night market or a street market. Yeah, I did my best. It's hard to make a street market in this game, but I took a cobblestone street texture. I took as many of these shop assets as I could, and I just loaded them up super nice and tight against the street, so that hopefully we get this feeling of like this little street market over here. But you've got a little bit of this street market feel because I think that makes sense, especially for somewhere that probably has a strong fishing community with these piers. You need to have somewhere for them to sell their wares, but cheaper than all these other storefronts. Overall, I'm really happy with how this district is filling out. From above, from the side, from the top, from the street level, it all just looks amazing. And if we take a look at our money shot, going straight from the subway station looking in, it looks so good. It looks so good. We're keeping our streetlights here just to get a little bit more of that overhang feel. You got your Chinese gate here, you got your terracotta roofs on all these assets. You got a somewhat wide road, but then you get your brick sidewalks and your brick tiled street right here, leading into a forested park and the Chinese library, which is just, oh, look at how much traffic that is getting. This is just one of my favorite areas of the city nowadays. I love this view. I love how this district is turning out. Even walking down here as a pedestrian, I would so happily take pictures. Like, this view right here is so good. I would even risk going out into the crosswalk just to get this shot. Like, look at this. Oh my goodness, I'm so happy with this. You can take a little walk through the park, make your way past this tea house, make your way to the city library. You can cross with all of these folks over here past the old mural, take this little side road next to the library between this housing, make your way through this alley, make your way right out the back, do a little bit more shopping around here. And then once you get to the end of all that shopping, of course, you've got your night market waiting for you to celebrate. You got a little bit of a Chinese asset right behind it. You got your night market right here. And it all just forms together to make this really cool cultural district that feels nice from all angles. I am so happy with this build, y'all. I'm so happy. I know this episode is running long because, my goodness, it's taking a while for me too. But we're not done yet. We're not done yet. Because now that we've built this whole East Asian cultural district and anchored it with a city library, it's time to move on to developing our Hilltop district. The East Asian Cultural District's Hilltop District is an area that was historically anchored by a major mall, so we're going to need to clear out this area, place down some mall assets, and then begin to form the district all around it. The Hilltop District is an area all centered around this hill right over here, which sets the boundary for our Old Town for our cultural district. But as the city developed, they really wanted to push up the hill, see how far out they could get with these bigger buildings and all that. So in this segment, we're going to fill out this entire grid over here, do a little bit of work to our Grand Central Station to tie it all together, and fill out this entire Hilltop district over here to really bring this entire segment of terrain together. First up, I've done a little bit of work on a couple of blocks over here. We had an awkward parcel right between where our Grand Central pathways ended and where our train station was, so I took one of our signature Eastern European offices right over here. Since it had the right brick texture, it felt a little bit modern, and it fit the block, and that I made sure that it really felt like it worked with the block by adding in all of these pathways that snake around it, putting hedges that border the entire property, creating this nice manicured grass circle, putting a bunch of benches down, putting a little fountain out front, and all together this feels like some sort of major corporate headquarters that just really acquired this piece of land right next to Grand Central and wanted to turn it into a mini campus of sorts for them to use with all the pathways and this big old signature office of theirs. I put a tile surface over this transformer station that we had previously, putting down a couple industrial props and storage units, and then using the fence assets to create kind of a little bit of a fence and gate off effect so that anybody who's walking along here doesn't notice this area as much, but they can still tell that it's industrial. Since we have the industry on this side, we'd much rather keep them focused on Spruce Street, which is where our big old intersection is over here. Look how many people are trying to cross that. That is crazy. We've got some detail along the train station over here, where we got some trees on one side, row homes on the other. And then, of course, on the other side, where we've had the city park for a while, I tried to tie it into the signature office building that we had over here for a while. This kind of feels like it might be some sort of community center. Maybe it is an office building, but I just tried to tile the surfaces into the sidewalks, use the same grass surface throughout the whole area. It just feels a little bit more cohesive of a block now. The next block over is a little bit more crazy. Where we had this Japanese head office beforehand, I also brought in this high-density business that has a somewhat similar motif. If you look at them architecturally, they feel like they could be big building, tall building if they were colored a little bit more similarly. We got another motel here. We got a couple of other signature housing buildings and low-density housing buildings just starting to taper off as we get back closer towards this hill. I don't want it to be anything too major. I recolored these office buildings from earlier. I know, I told you guys, I said, if I don't recolor them, yell at me in the comments. And hey, look, they're recolored. Be glad. Behind them, I plopped in a few more buildings that are kind of in the middle, all bumping up right against this retaining wall in the back and that staircase that I showed you beforehand. But we got a whole lot more work to do in this district, so I'll be right back with you now. Yep, check it out. We've got this whole area filled in right next to the train station. I built us a couple of pedestrian bridges because I was talking to a friend of mine, and she pointed out that there was not really an easy way for people to get from one side to the other without having to go underground here in the subway station, taking those stairs down and across and up. So we decided to build a couple of overground crossings for people. One of them connects just straight up and over the train tracks, and the other connects right into this park that we got over here. I used some more of our Dragon's Gate assets, but I also used a couple of others. Like over here, we've got an Eastern European business, same with over here. Here we got a North American one, and then I just recolored everything to use that same sort of terracotta shingles look on top, just so that it feels cohesive as a district, as if the architects were really paying attention to the buildings around them and just tried to keep things feeling a little bit more right. So we used corner pieces wherever just to start to conform to this awkward street grid. We're stepping up the hill, so we've got a few key walls around here. We've of course got some strategically placed landscaping to hide any imperfections in the terrain, and just to kind of blend the hillside so we don't have everything doing a retaining wall like this. But here at the elementary school, since we do have the retaining wall, I filled in the rest of the area. I brought a fence all around here so the kids don't go falling off the edge. I took this station services building actually from this bus terminal. I just detached it using Anarchy and brought it right up here because I think that kind of looks nice. It's like this little lunch area for the kids. I think it's cute. I like it. Then we got another Dragon's Gate business right over here, and where the landscaping was starting to be janky, we've got even more strategically placed landscaping. You can see I didn't put it right in there, but that's what it would have looked like if I didn't landscape right there. The other significant thing that you'll notice is that I've transformed this pedestrian area over here. Previously, this was all pathways going over grass, but I just didn't think that felt grand enough for Grand Central Station. So I took one of our G87 water surfaces right here, and I drew that out through this entire area, lowered the terrain very slightly, and turned all of these pedestrian walkways into bridges. Then really to complete the look, I just put a bunch of our major fountains right in here, sunk them into the ground ever so slightly, and it looks now like we've got this whole big old water feature over here. Even though there's no actual working water, it looks like a really cool water feature. And from here, it just frames Grand Central so well. Now that we've got that, it's time to move north and work on our mall. The mall in the Hilltop area is going to go right up here. If we look at the terrain that we've kind of got a nice plateau up here, so I'm thinking that I'm going to use a little bit of push and pull of the terrain. We're going to smooth out some of these hills and use the land that we reclaimed from smoothing out the hills to fill in this little impression over here and turn this into a more solidified of a platform. We're going to have to move this United Mall and Fashion Square ever so slightly, because what I want to do is place down this German department store from the German region pack. It looks amazing, but I don't just want to place one of them down. Because it's got this really nice look on the back, I'm going to place two of these signature department store buildings down, and that's going to create this amazing mall look effect for us right here in the center of the district, and all of that looks like this. Check it out, check it out. Look how these two mall buildings fit together so perfectly. I had to use Anarchy to place it down twice, but it looks so good. I had to move the United Mall to the back. I moved the Fashion Square to the front, put a parking garage in there, and a couple of other signature buildings. We got a mixed-use housing building, a theater over here, and a park over there. Then I used that rocks technique that I told you about earlier as we were drawing around this lake over here. I used that rocks technique and that stair technique that we had over here, combined them both to create this hiking path that runs up to the top of this hill, where I put down a couple of parks just for some really, really nice city views. I mean, look at this view over here from downtown, and this view of Old Town over here. Oh, I love it so much. I feel like this department store is just the right size, where if you come over here into Old Town, it feels like some rich developer from Old Town, someone with probably old money, maybe one of the developers of Grand Central and the railroads, realized that he could buy up this entire Hilltop district. So he bought this whole hilltop and he built this monumental store for himself up here. And I think it just works so well. It's this perfect hilltop accent piece. It really creates this amazing shopping district, and you can see the people love it too. Look how many people we have visiting this whole area. There is no way, there is no way you have not enough customers. Look at this. Look how many people are visiting. Like, this is all just for this theater? You gotta be kidding me with this not enough customers. Come on now. As this district grows, I'm sure it'll attract more customers and it'll all work out together a little bit well. But I love the foundation of the district. We've got the most important parts of the district filled in, I feel like. We've got the main commercial anchors of the district. We've got a hiking path. we've got our super special thing. So the last thing that I need to do is connect this all up to the subway station in Grand Central and just fill in all of these empty areas. So let's go ahead and build all of this. All right, step 1 is done. We've got these hillsides filled in with a whole bunch of row homes, again using that stone technique to blend anywhere that we had some weird terrain inaccuracies. I placed down a signature building over here because the brick kind of tied it all in, and I thought it made sense as you're working up towards this luxurious housing to have a little bit more luxurious of condos over here and some brick offices and all that. We've got ourselves some stairs, some pathways, some really cool like unique row home districts over here. Like this is a whole bunch of brick row homes that were probably developed by a single guy. And then we just got a little bit of a park in the middle over there. We got some connections that connect right up to these streets over here. They're not accessible, they're super steep roads, but the row homes are able to bridge that quite elegantly on both sides of this. I love how this looks, by the way. Just check out that view, so nice. I forested up this entire hill because I was looking at the densest, hilliest city I know, which is of course Hong Kong, something that we've talked about in the past is a big source of inspiration for me. And if we look at the hills around here, all of them are super densely forested until you get up to the highest of peaks. As soon as you hit the back of your development, it's all just forest. No matter how dense it is, all of the hills around here are forest. There's no barren areas. So of course I had to forest up our hills and city skylines as well. And here in City Skylines too, I love how it looks. It just fills out the whole area really well, and especially from above, I like it. The last thing that I wanted to touch on that we did some work on over here is this single family residential area. I focused on placing down some Chinese and Japanese style buildings over here. This is the previous road that we had over here, and I added in a second Dale Street that kind of snakes its way down to this intersection over here. And we've got 2 major mansions over here for the artists. We've got a sculptor's mansion over here with its own presumably pickleball court or tennis court of some sorts, which gets an amazing view of downtown from this balcony right over here. I mean, check that out. I actually trimmed down some of the trees that I originally had over here just to make sure that they keep their view running straight out. And then over here we've got the Painter's Mansion, which has a phenomenal view of the East Asian Cultural District, and I extended their property all the way down here to Concord Lane and had them plant their own bush field, apple tree field maybe, so that they don't have any big trees interfering with their view either. The Painter's Mansion and the Sculptor's Mansion both are luxurious people with luxurious views. I'm kind of thinking that this whole single family area feels more like a historic district. This isn't really dense enough or big enough for any sort of upzoning to happen here, so this is probably some sort of historic district, funded especially by the painter and the sculptor who just want to be able to keep their houses here without them being transformed into any sort of high-rise buildings like this head office over here is. And I like how it ends up feeling at the end of the day. We're using even more of these rocks and bushes, and we're keeping up with the dense trees just to make sure that the whole area feels filled in pretty well, despite it being less dense. I'm using a grassy surface to keep it feeling a little bit more tame, but it's nothing that's too absurd. It actually doesn't feel like a huge drop in density for the area. It just feels like it might be part of this big old park, so I think that kind of works out. We've also got a little bit of extra row homes all along the edge of the park over here, which I think makes sense. They're pretty shallow, so they're not pushing into the hills. It's just as far back as we feel comfortable going. Now with all this done, the last thing is filling in these last couple of blocks here, and this is probably going to be a little bit of a generic effort, so I'll come back with you once it's done. And there we go. Look at this, look how cohesive it all feels. It feels filled in, it looks so good. Yes, so in this area, I put in a couple of parking lots over here. I linked 2 small parking lots together with a custom roadway. I just copied that in and connected them both up, and then brought the surface through and put a little decal in. They both have entrances on opposite sides, and then I put some bushes around there as a little bit of a fence. Up here by the metro station, we've got a couple of little parks, and then in here, I've got a few little office building assets that continue on with this mid-density theme. You can tell that none of these wanted to get too high up. There were probably some strict zoning codes put into place over here, where now that we're out of downtown, it doesn't get to be high rises, it doesn't really want to be taller than this department store, so that the department store stays as a big regional feature. Since this is technically still the East Asian Cultural District, I put in a fair few more of these Dragon Gate assets, but we kept it as a transition district, which is why we have this pub here and on this whole block here that we talked about earlier. Then in the back behind all that, I just put a couple of industrial buildings because it kind of feels like that makes sense with, ooh, why is there a smokestack? Don't like that. It kind of makes sense to have industrial buildings back here along these little alleys pushing up against the hillside because they're not as easy to access as the main roads over here. And then finally, for this awkwardly shaped parcel, rather than trying to squeeze buildings in here, I instead turned it into a construction site. You can see that it was probably formerly a gas station or two, but now it's just got some construction vehicles on it. It's got a crane on it. It's got the starts of one of the parts of the building. It's got some terrain work going on, some shipments being delivered. This is going to be a really cool building one day in the future, just not today. It's a construction site for now. We've got a second construction site over here on the opposite side. This one's a little bit smaller. You got a smaller dump truck, just a couple of foundations and walls coming in, but it's still going to be a really cool building of its own merits. I like how these two construction sites make it feel like these are the last remnants of an infill area that's really being filled in. The boundaries are being pushed. I can expect that this area might turn into a construction site one day, so might these two and this parking lot. These parking lots might turn into some sort of mid-rise buildings one day, but for now, this is how it is, and I love how it feels. All of this is filled in so well, and I just love how this is really encapsulating that feeling that we talked about, especially in the earlier episodes. I wanted this to feel like a Boston Old Town, and it's really starting to get that vibe for me, especially as now we're creeping up onto the hilltop, and you've got all these more historic cultural areas. The piers feel just that much more prominent. This view right here especially, I just love it. It feels like such a city over here. You got your parks, your greenery, your big transportation networks, your trains in the bottom right corner. So many people, so many major assets that you can point out. You can point out the ferry terminal, you can point out the Chinese library, you can point out your mall, Grand Central, the old buildings, the headquarters, the parks on top of the hill. It just all works so well, and I'm so happy for it all, and I hope you are too. Everything is working really well from the convention center side up here as well. The convention center looks nice. The greater Grand Central district still fits into the whole context of the rest of our development today. In fact, it just ties it all together so well. Like this view from above right here, so good, so good. And now that we have all of this amazing development complete, it's time to wrap up the episode with some cinematics. Oh my goodness, let me tell you, those cinematics really show just how much changed in this episode alone. I don't know if you could tell by changes to my voice, changes to the season in game, but this episode took me literally forever. I spent almost 3 full weeks working on this episode. And yes, I don't work full-time on this game. I have a full-time job in real life. This is kind of just like an after work and weekends thing, but this took me so much time. It is absurd. Filling in these blocks is not as easy as you would think when you want to make them as detailed as I am right now. These are such urban blocks, and there's so much thought that I'm putting into each and every building that's being placed down here, where it all goes, how it all intertwines together, and I'm so happy that I'm doing that, because that was one of my big goals for the series. It was making sure that everything is getting a sufficient amount of thought and I'm not just sprawling eternally with no reason, but it is just taking that much longer. In this episode, we developed this entire intersection over here, including this lake, the motels around here, this side over here with some custom buildings. We developed Grand Central and the whole greater Grand Central a little bit more with a 1 million square foot custom convention center over here. We've got the East Asian Cultural District, all anchored by this big Chinese city library and this amazing money shot view looking right down there. And then we move on into the Hilltop District, where we've got this historic housing area and the big old mall, commercial area, commercial core, some townhouses, and a Hilltop Park District. This has been one of my favorite episodes, but I really think in the future, if I want to do something like this, I'll probably break it up into a few more episodes. One episode for the Greater Grand Central, one episode for the Lower East Asian Cultural District, one for the Hilltop, and we would have been good. But I'm happy that I did it this way anyway. It was just a huge megasode, and it totally transformed this feeling of this area, and I'm so happy with how it feels. So with all of that said, I thank you all so much for watching. In the next episode, we've got to fix a few problems of ours. We're short on power right now, our transportation network isn't fully up and running, we've got a bunch of other problems to fix. There's a lot of things coming, so I thank you all for watching this episode, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye!